Hello, hello. Everyone is super prompt. We have people already in here. Happy Thursday. Wow, yeah, super prompt. Love it. Love it. I know it's busy 2022 planning season, so really appreciate everyone taking the time to actually attend this live. I mean, who attends webinars live nowadays? There's so many, but really happy to have you guys here. We'll get started in just a second. It's gonna let a few more people roll in here. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're dialing in from, a little bit about you if you'd like. And let's jump right in. I'm going to present. Are we good? Good. Cool. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about AI and machine learning today. Those are big topics, but hope everyone's just as excited as I am from the marketing perspective, how you can better leverage that. And just want to give you a quick idea of what to expect today. So we have two of our senior analytics team members joining us, Jocelyn, who's an associate analytics director, and we also have Mike, who's our senior analytics lead. They're going to be walking you through just at a high level, getting you started with some of the concepts with AI and ML, getting your feet wet. Then they'll get into some actionable tips and case studies for you all to see how you can actually put your data into action and put all of that to good use. As a heads up, this will be recorded. So if you have to jump at any point, if you need to rewatch it later, whatever you want to do, we'll send it right to your inbox afterwards. Just keep an eye out for that. You'll also get a link to this presentation deck. And last few things here, if you take a quick look at the bottom of your screen, there's two features I'm going to point you to, chat and Q&A. So we have about 10 minutes at the end that we have reserved for Q&A. If you want the panelists to actually answer your questions live, please put your question in that Q&A box. I'll be able to see it there, surface it to them, and we'll get that answered for you at the end. Otherwise, we are huge on commentary at SEER. Love the discussion. Use that chat as much as you'd like. We have a lot of folks joining us from different industries, different job titles, so good chance to kind of talk to a few folks as well. It's kind of like the two big things, but otherwise, that's about it for housekeeping. And I'm Kaya, I'll be behind the scenes, senior marketing manager at SEER, formerly analytics manager, so it's also why I'm super excited to hear more about this topic. So I'll pass it right off to Jocelyn. We just jump right in.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Kaya. So why are we here? The AI and machine learning space is really riddled with a whole spectrum of connotations. On the one hand, there are folks who hear these terms and think, Jarvis from Iron Man, sci-fi, robots taking over the world. And maybe you're not that kind of conspiracy theorist, but that's fine. There are those people out there. And then on the other hand, there are folks who may be a little bit more down to earth, but hear AI and machine learning and they think, oh, I need an advanced degree and heavy training with coding and statistics and need a significant investment in order to really lean into this future. When in reality, there have actually been a lot of advancements and stewardship in the space to help make machine learning techniques more accessible to all and to be able to reap those benefits across marketing. So when it comes to looking at technology, is really one way that we kind of look at it is through this methodology designed by Gartner, which is called the hype cycle. So the idea is understanding, what is fact or cap? Did I say that right to you Zillennials out there? But ultimately, like what's hype and what's not. So for those who make it, the real drivers of technology that have measurable promise and impact, they follow this cycle as they come onto the scene. So first is that innovation trigger, where the moment where smart people think to themselves, this should be so much easier. They see a proof of concept, they're bought in without there necessarily being a viable product to actually buy out there. That skyrockets into the peak of inflated expectations when there's some early publicity on success cases. Everyone wants those wins and they're super jazzed about them. Some companies who are really excited open their wallets, but many think it's too far out of reach, which quickly drops down into the trough of disillusionment, where interest wanes. A lot of those early experiments and implementations fail to deliver the results that they anticipated. And this is where contenders either thrive or fail, depending on their ability to improve their products or tech. And then finally, we get to this slope of enlightenment, where there are more case studies and use cases out there to demonstrate how tech can drive business value and those applications become more widely understood. Second gen and third gen products come out as the offering gets further developed and refined. More big organizations fund those pilots. Conservative companies play that wait and see game. And then there's the plateau of productivity, where we finally get to mainstream adoption. It's clear where the value is, and the tech is widely applicable, relevant, and actually drives returns. With machine learning, especially when it comes to marketing applications, we're still in that slope of enlightenment phase. There are some proven applications, especially in like the traditional media space, but there's some black box usage in digital media that we don't really know fully what those applications are and how we can actually get from investment to return when we actually talk about machine learning. Of course, I think everyone at this point, and you're probably all here because you agree that machine learning sounds great. Most folks recognize that AI and machine learning would help them win in the marketplace. In a study done by Google and MIT, they were able to find that 85% of managers that were surveyed believe that AI will create a competitive advantage for them. 75% believe that greater investment in machine learning will help them achieve goals, and 66% believe machine learning will enable more strategic activities. And that's all well and good, but I'm sure you're wondering, how the heck do I actually get there? So one of the ways that we're gonna, just get a better understanding, get to know you fine folks, we have a poll for you where we're gonna ask you yes, no, or maybe with regards to this statement. I have the tools and team to leverage machine learning in my marketing program next year. I will give you guys a minute to answer.
People are fast, shocked. It's Thursday afternoon, loving it.
Yeah, getting into it. All right, what are our results? Oh, wow, split. All right, can you all see those answers? I don't know how this works. Yes, 30%, no, 30%, maybe 41%. All right, well, I mean, that's what our goal is today to talk about. Our goal is to understand where you and your team can incorporate machine learning into your work in a way that is accessible, attainable, and actionable to enhance your marketing programs. The goal is to make sure that it's not just this one and done thing, but that it's sustainable and it's actually strategic.
So the world of AI and machine learning is full of a lot of different buzzwords. You hear a lot of it within content that's out there for industry-related publications, or you hear it from salespeople. A lot of the terms are very similar, but there's subtle nuances between them. So we want to go through and make sure we're all level set here and we're all speaking the same language. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's really an umbrella term. And the core idea behind it is replicating human intelligence and behavior within computers. So there's a lot of subcategories within AI. So some of them are looking to replicate things like the way we see the world with computer vision, which is really important for autonomous cars, or natural language processing, which really looks to translate our human language into something that computers can interpret and understand rather than utilizing programming languages. But really what's driven the most advancement over the last few years is machine learning. So at its really the base level, machine learning is applied statistics, and it really allows computers to improve from experience. So a really good example, if you think about the show Antiques Roadshow, you have appraisers up there who can walk up and see an object and give you a pretty accurate value of an object if it's a painting or a piece of furniture. And the reason they're able to do that is because they have decades worth of experience and they've seen dozens of similar objects go up for sale at auctions. And what we're trying to do is take data and use that at scale for marketing purposes as well, so they can learn from experience. And then the final component here, to go one level deeper, is really trying to replicate the structure and architecture of the neurons of our brain with something called deep learning. So you hear this a lot. It's one of the bigger areas of hype. Really what it is taking multiple different algorithms and stringing them together and passing the results from one to the other. And that's why it's called deep learning, because there's multiple items strung together. Today, we're really going to be focused on what's called shallow algorithms. So it's really a single algorithm that gives you an output. And then when we talk about data, a lot of times we're often defaulting to talking about descriptive analytics. So descriptive analytics is really the idea of looking back historically of what has happened. So this is when you look at your marketing campaigns and you see what your click-through rate is, or you see how many visitors you got to your site last month. The power of machine learning really comes because we can now take a lens to take that same historical data and look towards the future. So beyond saying what happened, we can say from a certain level of degree of certainty, here's what's likely to happen. And this opens up a whole new world of strategic thinking for marketing, because we could say this customer has a 70% chance of converting. Then we can start thinking about what's the element that gets them over the finish line. Or this customer has a 50% chance of lapsing and no longer using our product. How do we intervene to keep them engaged with the brand? So this is forward thinking and more strategic in terms of the data usage. So like many things in life, machine learning can actually be broken down further into different categories. So if you think about the world of beer, you have your ales and your lagers, or you have your red wine and your white wine, or you have your sporting dogs versus your working dogs. So we can break down machine learning into individual categories as well. So the first one here is supervised learning. So as the name implies, it's a pretty hands-on methodology. So when we take our algorithms, we're really focused in on what the output would be. We're defining that from the get-go. And we're also identifying what features we want to include. So we're saying these elements we believe are going to be predictive of the outcome that we want. So because of that, it's all relatively straightforward in terms of our validation. We kind of know what the steps and the processes are, as opposed to unsupervised learning. So again, as the name implies, this is a little bit more hands-off. So supervised learning, we're identifying what we're looking for, we want the outcome to be. In unsupervised learning, we're really letting the model determine what the output is. And also the algorithm will go through and it will choose what elements are going to be predictive of that outcome. Because that's a little bit of a black box, the validation there is a little bit harder. So you have to put more work into understanding what the actual output is. And then the final area is reinforcement learning. And this is truly learning by example. We're not giving any type of insight or instructions to the model. What we're really saying is this is the outcome we want, figure out how to get there. So because we're doing that, it's going through multiple trial and error iterations. So it's very resource intensive in terms of computing power. And it's also much more complex in terms of how do we get from point A to point B. And it's a little bit fuzzy in terms of what the processes actually look like inside that black box. So if you've ever seen any of these Boston Dynamics robot fail videos, this is a great example of reinforcement learning in action. I will remind you that this is being recorded. So if you are laughing at these fail videos, the robots will have this documented when they become sentient and take over the world. So I'd be careful if I were you. So now as we continue kind of our analogy a little bit here, so we've gone from the broad categories, now we're gonna get a little bit more specific. So in this case, we're gonna start talking about, your IPAs and your Pilsners and your Pinot Noirs and your Chardonnays, or your Huskies and your German Shepherds. So the first main algorithm we really want to focus in on is linear regression. And if you've ever taken a statistics class, this should sound pretty familiar. As I mentioned before, machine learning, for all its hype, is really just applied statistics. So linear regression can be used for things like predicting the value of a customer, predicting the number of clicks that a subject line or an ad might get. So your output here is going to be numeric. A similar process is logistic regression. So the idea here is that you're able to prioritize targets or indicate people who may churn. So it's a similar process of how we get here under the hood, but the outputs are slightly different. So we go from a numeric output to a categorical output. So it's a yes or no, churn or not churn. And these are two really classical examples of supervised learning. So as we take a step down and we look at the world of unsupervised learning, the classic example here is a clustering algorithm. And really what this does is it'll take your audience and it'll break them into subgroups. So your output is going to be groupings of different pieces of content or audience members, as opposed to numeric or categorical. And as I mentioned before, the output here takes a little bit of understanding because the computer kind of goes through and makes these classifications on their own. All right, so now that we have that all under our belt in terms of those buzzwords, we're going to actually look at what the process actually is to get from A to B in machine learning. So when we think about traditional programming, we start out with our data, and then we move and we down and to write some static code. So we'll go through and write out what the process looks like. We'll have the machine perform that, and then we'll get our output. So it's literally a linear process from A to B to C. When we move over to the world of machine learning, we introduce some new concepts here. So we start out with data, as we did before, but then we enter into this idea of algorithms. So an algorithm is a set of steps to go through. The way I like to think about it is kind of the blueprint. And one subtle nuance here that a lot of people kind of use interchangeable with the idea of algorithm and model. So as I mentioned, your algorithm is kind of the blueprint. So if you think about a house, this will tell you where to put the walls, where to put the doors, the windows. Your model is the finished product. So that's where the customization comes in. So you take your algorithm, you have their base level information. Your model is like deciding what kind of countertops or cabinets to install in the house. So it's that customized element of the blueprint. So as it goes through that algorithm, it's going to go through a series of hypotheses, and it'll take some data and feed it back into the algorithm and make some fine tuning, and we'll come out with our output. And we'll talk through that in a little bit more detail. But this is generally the flow. So it's not as linear. It's a little bit of a looping program. So as we get into the actual process here, as I mentioned before, we start out with data. So you don't necessarily need big volumes of data to get started with machine learning. You don't have to be Amazon or Walmart and have terabytes of data ready in your data warehouse. You can start out with what you have today. So you can take data from any of your digital marketing campaigns, your Google Analytics, your CRM programs, and you can start utilizing that data today to do these processes. And the biggest thing, we've come a long way in the last few decades in terms of technology, but one thing is always held constant: garbage in, garbage out. So you'll hear the stat about 80% of any data science or machine learning projects, about that time is spent cleaning the data, because that is really important, because we want to make sure we're providing all of our algorithms clean and accurate data so we can be confident in the output. So once we have clean data, then we start moving over to the training phase. So training phase you can think of as kind of an open book test. So we say, here are all the answers that we want you to learn. We feed it through the algorithm and we make sure that all the outputs are coming out clean. And in order to accomplish this, again, you don't need a ton of investment up front. There are a lot of open source programming languages that have pre-built libraries. So you can utilize Python or R, or even some of the technology you might already be utilizing within the Google marketing stack has some pre-built machine learning functionality built in there that you can start using today. So you don't need any special investment here. But once we go through and we do this training process, we move on to the next step, and we have our open book test, and then we go to a real final exam where we go and we take a similar data set, but we remove all the answers and we say, okay, now you tell us what is the output that we would expect here. And this is really where we come through and we go through that process of testing, validating, and going back through that loop. When we come out of our test, we're really looking for three things. We're looking for accuracy, precision, and recall. There's a lot of nuances in there, but really what we're looking for is how often can it predict the right value and how often does it give us false positives. So once we have that testing validation, we go through the tuning phase. And really what this is making sure we're making tweaks. And this can be done manually or algorithmically to make sure we're getting a balanced report, because we want to see accuracy, but we also want to avoid something called overfitting, which is essentially learning the data too well. So if you imagine growing up, you've only seen German Shepherds. That's the only dog you've ever seen. To you, a dog has 4 legs, is black and brown, has a long snout. When you see a Chihuahua, you're going to get a little bit rattled because that doesn't fit the mold of what you expect. So we want to make sure there's a little bit of flexibility when we throw new data at a model, that it can still interpret it in a way that it understands. And the final piece here is deployment. So deployment in this case could be any number of things. It could be moving a model over into production, where you're taking it online and you're using it to modify, say, your CRM program to change your cadence, or optimizing your bids or drive personalization on your site. But it could also be an output that you utilize for your strategic marketing planning to help prioritize targets or identify new audiences. So there's a couple different areas of deployment here that we can really speak to in the next few slides.
All right. So Now we all hopefully have a better understanding of AI and machine learning in practice. But now you're probably thinking, great, Mike and Jocelyn, that's all well and good. I took a lesson here. But what do I actually do with this? So that leads us into our next poll, which is true or false? Only data scientists and engineers can leverage AI and machine learning. It's kind of a gimme, but we want to see who's still there. Hey, you were listening. Awesome. So you're probably not surprised to hear that the answer is false. There are a number of different ways that you can apply machine learning to target different parts of your marketing program, depending on where you want or need to focus. And that's the key here, is that you don't want to just say, I want to invest in machine learning. I'm ready to do it. Let me fork over some cash. It's really being targeted and making sure that we are saying, hey, I really want to work on my messaging, or hey, I really want to work on my audience. So that's really where we're going to get to, is really understanding, hey, these are the different places where you can start applying machine learning across your marketing program.
Yeah, and across the board, we want to make sure that everyone involved in the marketing campaign has a really firm understanding of what different elements we can impact, because that's really how we're going to arrive to really creative and strategic solutions using machine learning. So everyone from the C-suite through to copywriters, analysts, we want to make sure everyone has a firm understanding of these different elements, because they're the ones who are really going to drive forward some of these new ideas. So the really core elements of the customer journey that we can impact through machine learning, we started out with the right person. So we want to identify who our target audience really is. And we can do that through several different methodologies and looking at segmentation and understanding behavioral analysis. Once we understand our customers, our targets, we want to make sure we're getting them the right message. So through that, we'll look for what their content affinity is and how do we drive personalization knowing that. And the final element here is making sure that we're getting the right message in front of them at the right time. So we'll be able to impact our budget optimizations and also our ad sequencing. And the final component is the right measurement. So one of the great things about digital marketing is that almost everything is measurable. So we'll be able to understand how users are interacting with our campaigns through data-driven attribution, and also in engaging with potentially some offline channels as well using marketing mix analysis. So we'll start out with finding the right audience. One of the other elements of digital marketing, which is amazing for me, is that we've been able to move away from this idea of mass audiences to be more personalized in subsets, to be more granular in terms of who we're targeting. However, we know that not 100% of our target audiences are going to convert. So machine learning can really help us to prioritize those targets and understand where to invest. So using some pattern recognition, we can understand where customers are within your sales cycle. And that way we can ensure that we're getting them the proper touch points in that element. Some of our key activation points here. So we're going to move towards targeted messages to help move users through your continuum. So we know if someone is at the high level of your funnel or towards the bottom, we can change things around to make sure that the messaging resonates with them. And also we can say some folks are going to convert and others aren't. And we can prioritize our dollars towards those who have a higher probability of converting to be much more efficient with your budget, as opposed to the waste of someone who we know will never convert. And then this also opens up some new areas for audiences as well, using lookalike modeling. So we can take people who weren't currently on your radar and open up them to some marketing messaging, because we know there are other folks who look like them who also converted. So some of the key things that you'll hear as you talk through some of these types of analysis are K-means clustering, which is one of the core elements and core algorithms you'll use here. There's other tools that you might be using today, such as BigQuery, and then BigQuery actually has their own built-in machine learning process in the platform. So these are things that will require new investment. You won't require any new investments, but you have your stack already built and you can start today.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll add here is that this is the example on the left is a clustering exercise that we went through with a client, where we were able to take, a whole bunch of their event data. So understanding what people clicked on. This was actually for an e-commerce client. So we were able to see what they added to cart, different products that they interacted with, and all of those different pieces. And we fed that into a k-means clustering workbook. And we were able to see, oh, actually, based off of these groups, we were able to see the folks who are more of the window shoppers, the folks who are looking at like 20 different products in a given session, but didn't really commit to anything. So they didn't even add to cart. And so we would talk to those people really differently than, the people who are in cluster 3, which we were able to see. Those are the ones who are ready. They're ready to close, they're ready to purchase, they're ready to go. So we were able to not only understand from the existing audience, hey, these are the characteristics of a window shopper versus a closer versus a brand loyalist, but then we were able to feed that in and create a model where it was able to take the data that we were collecting then after we created the model and say, oh, this person has the early indicators of being a window shopper. Let's group them into this segment and market to them differently. So that's a way that you can take this one-time model or one-time analysis that you're doing and one-time, just like clustering analysis, and then actually turn that into something that is a workable thing in your marketing program. So that was one of the really cool things that we were able to do. I can't share a lot in terms of the actual results, but we were able to see some pretty significant increases in not only just overall e-commerce conversion rate, but also able to see a good conversion rate in our remarketing audiences because we were doing lookalikes based off of those different clusters and messaging those folks differently. So I wanted to call that out because this is a very tangible way to take something that, oh, cool, I want to do clustering, and actually turn it into something where you can activate within your marketing program. But you probably want to hear some results also. So while we've done this with a few clients, we want to share, some tangible examples in the broader marketplace. So this example of a more audience-focused machine learning effort comes from Harley Davidson. So hopefully, they produce very fancy motorcycles. I actually don't know. I'm not the best person to talk about this too. But they had a dealership in the New York City area that was dealing with waning motorcycle sales and overall interest. So they engaged with an agency that leveraged an AI-driven marketing platform to measure and automatically optimize the outcomes of those marketing campaigns across their digital media mix. So through data points such as their CRM and sales data, their paid media data and performance overall, and then also their web data, they were able to identify with all of those different touch points, high potential customers, and then also based off of that, creating those lookalike audiences to widen their viable pool of prospects. And then by further understanding those characteristics of who those high potential customers were, they were able to tweak paid media copy with messaging that resonated directly towards them. So, once you actually know the folks who are interested and want to go for it, you actually want to speak to them in the right language. So by identifying those audiences first, then you can actually have cascading effects where you can personalize and really hit where you need to. So the results, as you can already see, this led to, almost a 3,000% increase in overall leads, 50% of which came from lookalike audiences. So people that they probably didn't even have touch points with before, now they're able to reach them because they know what they're looking for. And then 40% of those sales were attributed to their AI system. So we'll be able to share. And so one of the things that will be a takeaway will also be links to these different case studies. You can take a look at them as well. But this is a great example of, AI in practice where you already have the data. You're probably already collecting a lot of this data right now and able to turn that into results to help jumpstart your marketing program even further.
Yeah, I think there's a couple questions in chat too we can jump through as we're in these case studies right now. So I think the first question is really around the key data points that you used for this example here that we're showing on the screen and why. So I think just at a high level, obviously we can't share too much of the actual data that goes into this, but really it's based on behavioral analysis and what people are doing on a specific site. And as Jocelyn mentioned, we have this data today that we can start looking at within your Google Analytics profiles. So this is something that we can pull directly from there. It's not something that you need to go out and purchase do new data sets or anything like that. It's really based on the behavior that we currently see on sites and use that within the model itself. And the second one is about the choice of model. So obviously, like I mentioned before, there's large categories of algorithms that we can use. Typically, what we go through is a process of a pipelining effect, essentially where we'll take data and we'll run it through multiple different models at a time and really see which one has the best results for that particular use case. So it is really dependent upon the input data as what model will work best. So there's a lot of leeway there that we'll go through and really let the models decide. So it's kind of like a battle royale for algorithms where throw data at all different algorithms and we see which one comes out as the victor. So in this case, we end up going with the k-means clustering.
Yeah, and I can talk to it a little bit further where also I glossed over all that went into this, but we also did a level of descriptive statistics and regression analysis to identify first what pieces were actually influencing conversion, and then we narrowed those down in order to pull it in. So this was a client that they had, I think, they were getting at least a good 16 million hits per month. So we can't run all of that through the system. That would just be a little aggressive and a little too much, where we need to narrow it down. So we were able to do a level of identifying the right parameters that we wanted to include, and then from there ran the k-means cluster. So yes, there's a lot of things involved, but that's a great call out. And there's, as Mike mentioned, the ability to run multiple things at once to understand which ones would actually fit and produce some results for us.
All right, so now that we've identified the right audience, we want to make sure we're getting them messages that really resonate with them. Again, that's one of the greatest things about digital marketing overall is that we're able to tailor messages down to specific audiences. And in order to do so, we can take a look at what we call their content affinity. So if you think about it, someone who's going to bake a cake is going to go to the store and they're going to purchase flour, eggs, butter. And those elements together will indicate that they are going to bake a cake. But there might be some other things that are purchased in that same basket. They could be bottling a bottle of wine to drink while they're waiting for the cake to bake or something like that. So we're able to take that same methodology, but substitute out those baking ingredients for content. So it could be content on the site, your CRM program. And we start to uncover some of those hidden patterns of people who are, say, converting on a site. They might be viewing these 3 specific blog posts that you have, and maybe they might seem unrelated to you, but to them, that's helping them to get the information that they need. So really what that helps us to do is to understand if there's audience-specific content that needs to be created. So going beyond just the pure optimization of the site, we can look at new content creation based on that hidden data that we wouldn't have seen without the algorithms. And then we could also be more targeted in terms of our ad copy, creative iterations, subject lines, again, to really speak to audiences to drive that engagement. So it's beyond just that mass communications and getting closer to that one-to-one personalization to those specific target groups. So as you go through these types of analysis, what you'll start to hear are some of these things like sparse matrix, market basket analysis. Those are really the key terms that you'll hear. And then some of the things that you would use to complete these could be something like R or Python. And like we mentioned before, these are programming languages that are free and open source. They each have their own set of libraries and packages, which will take your data and run through these algorithms for you. But there's also other tools that you could utilize, some paid tools, some free tools. It's really identifying the use case as opposed to the tool itself.
Yeah, and really looking at this as well, it's not like a novel concept. Like the idea is like, hey, a market basket analysis probably been around for a long time. The idea is really applying this to content in a way that is treating it the same concept. It's like what pieces actually make sense together to drive someone to purchase. So there are a lot, and like as Mike said, like these are existing packages out there. The top thing is really to organize it in a way that has it for the marketing application. So we're not saying that this is like a novel thing that suddenly showed up and is going to change the way that you look at everything, but it's taking an existing concept and an existing model and package and being able to apply that for a slightly novel use case. So another case study that is a little bit close to my heart as a person who actually has spent a decent amount of time in Tennessee, is this award-winning Tennessee Vacation Maker campaign. So as a person who spent time there, and I saw you, Marissa, on here, so I'm really excited that you're here, is that The state is not only physically wide, but also offers a number of different activities that appeal to different folks looking for a vacation. So the Tennessee Department of Tourist Development really developed a way to personalize their pre-roll ads that took the data that they collected and provided by users and cut together an ad real time that catered to their interests. Haha, so you can actually, in this day and age of privacy concerns and things like that, when people actually give you their data, using it to make a better experience. So that's what they did. They were able to use machine learning to really cater that video ad messaging to take the data and research they had into a marketing strategy that resonated with users at an individual level. It's a pretty amazing campaign. I was really impressed with it. So you should go take a look at it yourself. But it was able to say like, hey, we have 5 different major points of potential personalization. And based off of what people are giving, or also like the different data points that they had, someone who's interested in like fine dining, someone who's interested in live music, the people who want to rumble about who has the best barbecue. These are the folks that they were able to bring together and cut together a pre-roll ad that was really unique to them. So in terms of the results, they saw a 46% increase in website traffic, and then a 93% positive survey response rate, where folks were saying that the ads inspired them to take a vacation to Tennessee in the next year. So this is not only just like an opportunity to do video ad messaging and targeting, and I'm not saying everyone needs to build this real-time machine learning, but the opportunity to take data that has been given to you and really respecting it and being able to then turn that into a message that acknowledges where people are coming from and catering to those needs and what they actually want and are looking for, that's the goal and that's the dream. So definitely take a look. And yeah, I was very impressed by it. But yeah, the idea is like, hey, these people gave you their data. Now you're creating value with that data, and that's the goal. And that's why people are going to keep giving you your data if you're able to create value through those experiences and through those ads.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. As we move kind of away from the idea of third-party cookies and relying more on first-party data, we really need to make sure that we're creating that value for folks and creating those engaging experiences. And I think this is a wonderful example of just how we could do that. So now we have the right audience and we're getting them the right message. We want to make sure we're getting it to them at the right time. So as a user moves through the sales cycle, their information needs are going to change. So someone who's early up the funnel is going to need different information than those folks who are closer to conversion. So we want to make sure we can recognize where they are in that process and give them the right messaging as needed. So over time, users are evolving, and we can see what kind of content they're consuming and track that as they move through the continuum. And then we can start understanding what's that optimal order to give a user in order to get them over the finish line, whether it be conversion or getting it to them to go in store. So we can start seeing if there's certain sequences of messaging that really help people to move along faster. And that's going to vary by different audiences. As we mentioned, there's going to be a difference between audience types. Then they're going to have their own individual messaging types. And then here is really where we start breaking down the sequence of how it breaks down, how it flows through from one to the other. Some really cool activation points that you could utilize here are your ad sequencing. So that could be for your display ads. So you could say someone who's higher level funnel receives one ad. Over time, after they visit your site, then they get another ad, which is further along in the process, and then kind of modify potentially even the site itself as they land there and what they've previously seen. Another big area for activation is email stewardship. So you can alter your email cadence based on what kind of content they've consumed previously and where they are within your sales cycle to make sure that they're getting that right messaging in their inbox. And the final area here is sales resources. So we're able to deliver content that's relevant to where they are in the funnel and have it either drive to the website or to speak to a sales representative. We can have a number of different options here. So the main sights and sounds you're going to hear are message co-occurrence matrix, lookalike modeling, and again, this is all available in tools like R or Python. So really making sure that we're meeting the people where they are as opposed to just blasting out messages regardless of their current state.
So an example of this in practice is from Dell. So Dell tapped into the power of machine learning to really understand what words and phrases would help steward users through the conversion funnel at the right times. And by better understanding the messaging, the tone, the emotions that resonated at those key moments, they were able to activate that with an email. So as a result of isolating the understanding of what types of content encouraged engagement and eventually conversions, Dell was able to incorporate that right messaging at the right time to folks wherever they were at. And eventually they got to the point where they're able to do this, not and scale those learnings just from email where they already had that information, and then bring those learnings to paid advertising across display, Facebook, even their direct mail and radio ads. So that's the other piece that's really great is that the machine learning, especially with digital marketing data, allows you to take one small subset and understand really deeply what's going on there, and then be able to scale it across the rest of your program. So the ability to gain deeper understanding and pattern recognition within one channel really just like drove this whole strategy, which was awesome.
All right, then the final component here is finding the right insights. So as we mentioned before, digital marketing, we're able to track all those separate engagements from a user, and we follow them through the full continuum and full lifetime exposure to your brand. Digital marketing, I think as a default right now, we start thinking through last touch models. Essentially what we're looking at is giving full credit to the last channel that a customer touched before converting. But now with the ability to track end to end, we're starting moving towards larger, more robust attribution solutions. So within attribution, there's a number of different models that you could choose from. And it could be first touch, it could be last touch. You can distribute the conversions across all those individual channels. But there's actually something called data-driven attribution. Really, it drives based on the data that you have to look at the impact both positive and negative channels may have on that ultimate conversion. And you can even go a level deeper beyond just looking at the channels, but looking at what kind of content they've engaged with as well, and assigning out the attribution from individual creatives, either in display campaigns or email or even on the site itself, to understand, because users aren't really engaging in a siloed experience like we think of, paid search and display. They have a number of different touch points. We want to make sure that we're seeing the full spectrum of those engagements. So really the changes that we'd really be looking at here are, to your bidding and activation. We can also have much more robust discussions around your return on ad spend, what your CPCs look like. And we can use this to drive more data-driven decisions around how you spend your money within your marketing campaigns. So as I mentioned, there's a number of different models that you can choose from within attribution. You could also choose to use a custom model, which more fits to either your sales cycle or your industry. And then you might be utilizing tools that already have some of this attribution technology built in. So GA360 or GA4, you can start utilizing this today with some of your existing data.
All right. So for our final case study, we have BOSE. I'm sure you all have heard of BOSE. You've probably seen a lot of folks wearing their headphones, et cetera. So they were able to use their data-driven attribution model to optimize their advertising during the big holiday e-commerce season. And this was actually in 2020. So BOSE faced a few key challenges in 2020 that maybe were unique to them and not everybody. But one was increased competition in the consumer electronics category. So, those noise canceling headphones for folks who are suddenly together at home 24/7, more people were buying them. Two is heavy reliance on third-party retailers to drive sales. So a lot of things that were happening outside of their direct purview. And then number three was all of those brick and mortar stores that they relied on were closed during lockdown. So they really recognized, like many other brands, the need to really up their game on the direct-to-consumer side, driving sales through their website. So machine learning comes into play with this case study in two different ways. One is through Google Smart Bidding, through their advertising platform, and the second is through their data-driven attribution model. So the machines were able to real-time assess what's working, what's not, and adjust based on that model that looks at the relative impact of those multiple touch points and not just the last one. So, at this point, data-driven attribution is actually default within the Google Ads, all of their ads platforms actually at this point. So you're able to understand the relative impact of those ads, in conjunction with everything else that's going on. So as a result, they were able to see an 81% increase in e-commerce sales and a 35% increase in revenue from their search and shopping campaigns. And that's really like them leaning into existing technology that was made available through Google. So by using their web behavior as well as those data-driven attribution models and their smart bidding, they were able to really optimize what they were working with, and actually be able to make the justification for allocation for those programs and those campaigns, rather than just looking at a last touch perspective, especially for things like display. Sometimes, it doesn't always have a direct last touch impact. And so this allowed them to really understand the relative impact of each of those channels and campaigns. All right, so now what? I gave you a whole bunch of fun things and fun facts, and Mike told you how to do it, but what do you actually do? So the main key takeaways that we can provide for marketers at this point is, number one, machine learning is accessible if you can prioritize it. There are many proven machine learning techniques that are widely available to marketers without a significant investment in technology. If you have GA360, there is a setting within your view settings to turn it on, so turn it on. If you can also set up a free Google attribution project, and then you can also start, if you are on the cutting edge and ready to look into / build out your Google Analytics 4 platform implementation, like that's already built in there. But the second piece is making sure that your outcomes and goals driven versus technique driven. There's a lot of folks who, especially at the peak of that hype time, that said, I need machine learning, let me give you my money. But in reality, you need to actually be focused on where exactly you want to move the needle and where you want to be able to pull those levers. So being focused on what you actually want to have accomplished versus the fact that you want machine learning to do it is really the key thing here. And then finally, lean in where you can. There's a lot of opportunities to start identifying where there are easy wins available at your fingertips and identifying those opportunities for automation. So we talked about a lot of like really cool, sexy things of like how we were able to, how companies were able to move the needle on e-commerce conversion rate, revenue, et cetera. But machine learning also provides opportunities for automation to free up your teams to be able to do that strategic work and to do those analyses. So right now, even if you're not quite prepared to make the investment in some larger pieces of machine learning or AI, you will have the ability to start having those conversations and identifying places where your team might be spending their time that might not be the best use of their time. So those are our main takeaways that we can give to you at this point. But thank you so much for your time and sticking with us at this point, and we're going to open the floor for questions. And I know we had a few in chat as well as in the Q&A section, but.
Yeah, if we want to kick off with, do we have any recommendations or courses for someone who's learning machine learning for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of courses, on Coursera, which is a free platform you could utilize, the Andrew Ng machine learning course is the gold standard in terms of getting a really good intuitive understanding of how the process works. So you're not going to get too deep into utilizing Python or R, but really focused in on what the core concept of it is to kind of give you a good grounding. And then it's not technically a course, but a podcast called the Machine Learning Podcast. Is again really helpful because it goes through each of these separate algorithms and gives you the intuition kind of from the ground up, as opposed to being too technical. So you really get a firm understanding of it, especially if you're not going to be in a tool, coding all day. It really gives you an idea how to utilize it. I think those are two of the best resources out there.
We'll make sure to send those as well as part of the thank you email, so we'll make sure you get those. All right, we have a couple others here. How do you get buy-in from leadership to invest time and resources into this? It's a big one.
Yeah, I think one of the easiest ways is really to show what the return on investment is going to be. So as we mentioned, we're not going to start out with big investments in terms of tools or data, but really starting small, showing what that project could become and really showing what that return is, I think is a big thing that for any C-suite to see, is not necessarily focusing on what the impact is to a marketing campaign, but really what the impact is to the bottom line and show some efficiencies.
And from my perspective, I'm always a person who looks to reach a ceiling before going gung-ho on anything. So definitely identifying opportunities for experiments or pilots where you can apply machine learning right now, especially with some of these free tools, really can help get the buy-in. Because I guess it comes down to understanding what's the concern in making that investment? Is it the not trust in technology, the fact that people need the ROI, things like that? And that would change the way I would approach that conversation. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it starts with showing up and showing the proof. So that's why we tried to share a number of those different case studies, as well as the fact that like you can start with something small in an experiment and where you can lean in. So you can run a regression right now, probably like, I don't know, I learned in my like 101 stats course how to do it in Excel, which to be fair is not as rigorous as I'm sure many other ways that you can do it are. But I guess start where you can is my biggest recommendation.
And another one that's kind of in the same vein is, you need a large team to leverage like, a long-term strategy? And I'm gonna take that question a step further too. Do you need a specialized team? Asking for a friend, because it's something we've been wondering for a while as well, Nora.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily need a large team, but I think you need a focused team or team members. Machine learning and AI projects run a little bit different than traditional digital marketing projects. So I think you need to have a team member who has allocated time to go through and make sure that they have their resources available and they have time to experiment and try out new solutions. So it's not necessarily about the size of the team overall, but I think it's about the ability to focus in and really allocate the time and resources there. So I think that's a big element of it. And they don't necessarily have to be, a dedicated, you don't need a machine learning engineer when you're just starting out. I think as we start to lean into these projects, you can start out with a hybrid team member, someone who has raised their hand and say, hey, I'm interested in doing something that's a little bit more advanced and utilizing these tools and techniques. You don't need to go out and have a full-time hire of a data scientist from MIT or Harvard. You could have someone on your team who's kind of starting out, interested in the project, and go from there with the eventuality of hopefully, making it into a full-time role. But I think, just carving out that small percentage of time for them to start experimenting and do some MVPs is a great start.
Or, you can engage an agency that would be able to help you with some of these things. I think to go off of that, there are different pieces of this that you need to make sure, like from a team perspective, that could be outsourced and could also be built on your team. So like one is you need someone who can actually interpret the results. Well, actually, no. One, you need someone who can actually like define what you're trying to do. Two, run the thing. Three, interpret the results. And that same person could also say, hey, how can we translate this into strategy? So this is something that you can absolutely engage with someone like Sears, a lot of these other agencies will be able to do similar things as well. But the idea is like you need a partner who's going to help challenge the status quo. And be able to say, hey, I've been there before. Let me help you understand how we can apply it here. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity that you don't need a huge team, but you need someone who's actually going to steward those findings into strategy. And that's the biggest key. So if you've got people and you have marketing managers who are strapped for time and are all over the place trying to figure out how to do end of year, maybe it's not the best time to do it right now, but that's what I would say is the biggest important part, is carving out the time for someone to take those results and actually run with them. I hope that answered the question.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think we had one more, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, Allie, I saw your question in chat. So how much lead time does it take to set up your slide 39 AI analysis? Yes, so in that particular instance, because we had a whole bunch of data, it probably took about 2 to 3 months to set up because we had to parse through all of the different available data points to actually focus on the ones that we really needed in order to run the algorithm. That said, once it's already run the first time, it's a lot easier to run again. So there's a lot of big like time expenditure upfront to get something that's not just a one-time deal that you'd be able to reap the benefits of over and over again moving forward, or like, you know, tweak the model moving forward, and that's a lot easier. Hopefully that helps. And then for the BOST example, we've done things like that in conjunction with our paid team. So it depends on how big of a scale that we need to work with. So we can do, actually, at the end of the day, especially because smart bidding and data-driven attribution work together automatically in that flywheel, it's actually happening real time for you already. So we typically look at the performance of those anywhere from 2 weeks out from it first starting, although typically speaking, it needs to actually like settle and get enough data. You need at least 10 days worth of data to run those different things. And then we do check-in points at like a month, 2 months, et cetera. So it just comes down to like what cadence makes the most sense to do those types of evaluations in order to have the right data. I know I'm like waffling and caveating a lot here, but like it's totally doable to do at any point after that. And it's really just taking the time to take a look at it.
Yeah, I think there's another question here in the chat, the Q&A section about using reinforcement learning within our work and marketing in general. As I mentioned before, and I think you mentioned in your question here, you know, supervised, unsupervised learning, that's kind of your gold standard within marketing. Reinforcement learning is, you know, pretty rare. I think there's a few instances where it might be applicable, such as kind of situational planning, where you can kind of throw a model and have it go through a couple of iterations and see what that scenario outcome would be, and some strategy planning, things like that. But it's really few and far between when you use reinforcement learning, because again, it's really resource intensive. The things that we are really trying to accomplish are best uses for, you know, the classical algorithms that we would really focus in on. And then the final question, I think, was about some tools. We could follow up some different resources, but as we mentioned, you know, kind of default to utilizing tools like R or Python, which are, you know, require a little bit of training in terms of how to utilize them. But there's other tools which are more like WYSIWYGs that you can kind of start plugging in your data and use a graphical interface to make changes, things like that. So we can provide some updates there. And then, you know, obviously, like you said, we also can walk you through the process and help you understand what the strategy behind what you're trying to answer is, and we can give you better guidance about what tool would best be utilized there.
And on the reinforcement learning piece, there are a couple of things that people have started doing, but this is like, again, if you look at the hype cycle, this is where we're still looking for those proof points. We have seen a couple of folks in this space, and we've played around with initial things of, you know, data-driven messaging, and like being able to have like a machine actually generate the messaging that would resonate based off of the performance that's going on. So it's not the wide scale that I think reinforcement learning is really happening in other applications outside of marketing, but I know we've seen that, and I think like Coca-Cola's done some of that. There are a few other like big players that have done leaned into reinforcement learning, especially to really get into A/B testing really rapidly for some of that messaging.
Awesome. A lot of information, but it's all so exciting. And it's good to know that it's more accessible. I think that's a big hurdle for a lot of people, like myself included, from marketing perspectives. You hear these big buzzwords and it doesn't seem tangible until you kind of see it. I really appreciate everyone's time today. Like I said, this is recorded. You will be getting the follow-up, and we'll have all the resources that we walked through today, and then some additional ones based on your questions in that as well. Thank you so much for sticking with us, and hopefully this is helpful. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, y'all. Happy holidays.
Thank you.